This is Jove. Thanks for the inviting. And Tim mentioned Timeplus a few times in the talk. I guess you
I
might.
get $2 each time.
And then you guys probably don't have idea what is Timeplus. So in short, it is a new player in the streaming area, and we really turn Kafka as a very easy to use SQL database.
Yeah, I think I wrote an article and an example program using Timeplus and Pulsar. I think it took me 20 minutes. And I'd never seen your product before.
Yeah,
That's
I guess
really
we
cool.
share a lot
Stuff.
of similar passion, right? I mean, for example, one of the good strengths of NiFi is really the ecosystem and also the easy to use. People don't have to follow like 20-page tutorial to understand what's going on. You just click, and do this intuitively. And Timeplus, we share the same passion. So today, people mainly using Flink or Spark, but it's certainly very powerful, mature, but you still have to learn everything in the first few weeks and set up a fairly big cluster. And in Timeplus, we try to make this much easier. You have a very nice UI using SQL as the primary interface to query everything. And also you can send to different places, including Slack, right? Which is not really a focus of Flink.
Yeah, Slack is a strange one. Like somebody was like, "Can you push it to Discord?" I'm like, "What use cases? Grab a bunch of streaming data off of some system, but then again, how do you do alerts? Maybe that's where your people are for the alerts."
Yeah, for example, we somehow either say eat our own dog food or drink our own champagne. So in Timeplus, we use Timeplus a lot for sure. So for example, we leverage stuff like Auth0 for our single sign-on and for new user sign-up. So every time when there's a new user sign up on Auth0, Auth0 actually have this webhook. You can configure a link. Tim, you mentioned this idea about whether REST is a streaming. For me, why not? I mean, you can get event by event.
Event by event.
And yeah, you get very low latency, right? And if you can really have a nice way to support different webhook, you don't even need to write any code. So in our case, we just configure our endpoint on the Auth0. Whenever someone sign up, then I can get this event pushed to Timeplus. And we have a SQL to understand, like, say, hey, kind of roughly which country it's coming from, and it can send me a Slack. And it also power up our like dashboard. So to me, it's a very nice way to engage with the users, right? So yeah, I mean, data processing is such a big topic, and the streaming sounds very fancy advanced, but actually can do many interesting things with streaming, and it's not so difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. The one thing that I've liked is, sometimes you use one tool, sometimes you use another, but usually you use them together. Like, can I write everything in NiFi? Should I? Like some people like, if I use NiFi, can you get rid of Kafka? Sorry, there's places for things. People brought that up a couple of times. Like neither of us wants to use NiFi or Timeplus or Flink as your queue or as your store of data for that, recent data or data that you want immediately.
Yeah, I mean,
to different places.
It's very difficult, even impossible, to have one thing fit for all. And we all in this big data ecosystem, we play our role to make something easier or cheaper or faster. For example, Timeplus, we do have the vision that is, we're not just processing what is happening right now. We also have our own storage. So for example, like you might configure the TTL, the retention policy in Kafka like 7 days. But if you want to query data older, you either have to set a very long retention policy, which maybe make the Kafka more kind of costly.
Yeah.
But you can also say in Timeplus case, we keep getting data from Kafka and store in our own engine. And you can run a query, say, what's the current revenue vs what's the revenue like 3 months ago. And we do such kind of area, but we are not really replace like any kind of OLAP or Snowflake, because we want to make you have more context data about your streaming. That's all. But now we are not really building the other data warehousing.
Yeah, I think the stateful thing comes up. I want to get to those. I saw a couple of questions come by. Is it all from Harry? Who's this Harry guy? Harry has a lot of questions, which is good. We don't want people to like, okay, streaming. So you want to feed
Yeah.
some of this and we'll.
So before Harry, there was one, it was more of a one before that. It said, thanks. You mentioned 2 good books or resources on streaming. Would you please mention what those are, or you can give them to me and I can post them, or maybe there's more books, or you just threw out a number?
Well, there's probably more than 2. I'm trying to think of the names, but I'll look it up. There's a free one by David Karamgard from Stream Native on Pulsar, but it covers a lot of streaming. And it's, again, a free PDF book. I'll make sure you get that link. There's a couple other ones I've seen that combine different levels of streaming. Unfortunately, the streaming space changes pretty frequently. So by the time it's in a full book, I mean, the paradigms are still there, but.
Yeah, I know someone also working on the book, Streaming Data Mesh.
Oh, yeah.
Even streaming database.
Not done yet, though. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is follow the articles, follow the demos. To me, the written part is good, but to see it, so you could try it and go, okay, I want to try it because it looks good on paper, but then you're like, oh, I have to do it. You know, sometimes you see some of the architecture. It's like, well, we've got 50 layers here. Like I was talking to a telecom company, and they're like, we've got this layer and this layer and this layer and this layer. And they're like, oh. They're like, we will never lose data and all this. I'm like, that's great, but there's a lot of planning you have to do for that level of stuff. And sometimes maybe if you started clean, maybe you don't need all the layers.
So Harry says he's a long-time enterprise architect, so he's seen a lot and always has lots of questions. So that's where the questions come from. He
Which
said,
is good, man. A bunch of us have been around probably for too long.
so in his list of questions, we'll start with the first set. How about Kylin? Did I pronounce that right? For cube storage, for multidimensional analytics. There's also Alluxio for managing file systems across platforms. Not sure if that comes into play here.
Well, I haven't seen Kylin in a while, but there's a lot of projects. Alluxio is kind of cool. I knew some of the guys from there. It's nice for having that in-memory layer that acts as a file system. I've seen people use it to plug it in because I believe it's S3 compatible and some other ones. So having like an in-memory giant cache is nice. You probably have some of that already. Flink has that as part of their state store.
Yeah, I guess one of the big, more like favor/debate is whether you want prefer using like SQL or using Python or Java or other DSL to processing the data and
API.
Or the API, yes. So in our case, we think even SQL is not the perfect language, but it's a common language. I mean, to some degree, it's even like a promote language for the streaming database, right? I mean, you can describe your requirement fairly clearly using SQL. So today, of course, there's a lot of kind of a prototype to see whether we can use in natural language to query database or even do streaming. Maybe, but you have to be very precise. Then maybe SQL will be very close to that language.
Yeah, SQL's a pretty good description for it. It is a little old. I was talking to Peter from Startree, and he's like, "We got to come up with a new grammar to kind of describe these things as they keep moving forward."
Yeah, we are lucky enough in that group. So we are under Streaming SQL working group. It's part of the ISO and other standard that is, we work with a few good player in this domain to see what kind of extra keyword semantics we need to add to SQL to make this more modern and can express enough to about, hey, I want to understand what's going on for the past 5 seconds and I want to get result every 1 second, stuff that, and how you define whether the data is late enough, how you define what's the frequency. So there's some addition to the SQL for sure, yeah. But it will take time to stand up, yeah.
I am very curious if in a year, a large language model will become an Apache project that is a standard interface so I can write natural language queries that actual work. I mean, we've been trying them since, the reason why you keep falling back to SQL, people have been trying them back, I don't want to say how old I am, Power Builder days and early SQL days, and they weren't quite right. So that's why SQL, everyone can agree to it. It's probably not the best paradigm for real time, but what else is there? maybe once we can agree and get natural language working, that'll be nice. Yeah, you could go back. I mean, I remember doing some of the stuff on the speaking into the computer very long time ago on fancy audio cards, but yeah, we can go back to pre-computers for people attempting this stuff.
Yeah, and even I guess almost every week I saw some new project. For example, there's one called Prequel. It's kind of a new language, inspired by SQL, but more expressive. For example, you start from, not select, stuff like that. But the problem with that is people are so used to SQL, right? It's not really about which one is best. It's more about which one is the common language.
That's kind of brings up a thing that I put something out on Citizen Streaming Developer, because at some point there's the most experienced engineer wants to write very, very complex code that solves hard problems. And then in the middle, there's a lot of people know SQL, maybe a little REST. They can do a lot of basic applications now, especially with the power of different tools to spin up on demand. They're in Kubernetes, strong SQL. And then hopefully in the end, there'll be more that someone could just describe the problem and do it. But, you know, there's still a lot of gray area in between that. Like, that's where I kind of try to get people into NiFi to kind of gel what they want to do with the thing, get it to a place where they can maybe hand it off to someone who's really good at SQL. Like, we need those people who are doing 20 years of Oracle and SQL, move over to doing streaming tools and come up with the extra functions, the extra paradigms, and maybe some codify. This is the best way to do this type of windowing query or some other query. And then some of that could be auto-generated by someone doing some natural language like, hey, I would like to get the weather over this period of time where it takes into factor this other data stream and blah, blah, blah.
I guess we have a question in the room.
Oh, in the room.
Yes,
Oh,
it should be having a higher weight than the online questions.
We are not, this is not virtual. We're really here.
We are real. This is not in a.
I don't know. Some people said that I am a bot.
Who knows? I think I already forgot the original question, but I think by now, one of the things I was considering is that there's this whole world within SQL, which is one world, but then real time and streaming is not necessarily always SQL. So just on this slide specifically, it says like there's a world sub 1 millisecond. The place where I live, it's mostly between 10 to 100 nanoseconds, like the kinds of optimizations that we're doing. So even just parsing SQL statement would take significantly longer than that. So there's been a precedent within the history when people decided to standardize the binary interface versus, let's say, a text-based interface. And it's been following me like for many years, like why people haven't standardized an SQL-like standard for that would be binary for those kinds of workloads, and would agree on that, especially like as we get to much higher throughput systems, potentially lower latencies, but not as much because the CPU frequency isn't growing that much. Is there any movement? Do you know any projects like this?
Yeah, so I share my kind of what I observe and experience, not have to be the perfect answer. So you mentioned that is even parsing the SQL itself may take some time. That's exactly right. That's exactly why there's a thing called streaming SQL. So in our case, for example, we have some clients in this real time or between the real time and real time. That is, they are expecting single-digit millisecond. They make it very clear when they talk to us. Hey, I can do this with a sub-second already. Can you do like 100 millisecond or even 10 millisecond? If so, we can do the POC. They are on the fintech area. They want to understand like, hey, all the trading kind of signals, whether someone is doing something very specious, whether the marketing value is getting too high or too low, whether they want to add more or like trade stuff. So they have very high expectation for the low latency. In our case, we're leveraging this concept of streaming SQL. So you run the query and the query always wrong. When you only passed once, And whenever there's a new event or there's a certain interval, the new result will be pushed to you, right? No matter using like SSE or WebSocket or using other protocols. So by doing so, it's we leveraging the underlying hardware as crazy as possible to processing the new event. And as a consumer, you always get the latest data, and it can be single-digit millisecond. Yeah.
Yeah, that initial parse is the only part. Once you're running the continuous SQL continuous.
And what is better that is, for example, you want to get stuff like, hey, what's my total amount of transaction in this hour? You want to get this real-time data, right? In some, I mean, in regular OLAP system, you need to run this query every second. Then every second, actually, you scan the data again. So, for example, in the number 3 seconds, you have to rescan everything in the past 2 seconds, which is a waste. And in our case, or in this streaming database where we do this incremental update, we know what is the data in the 2 seconds ago, and we know what's the delta, and we can add to it without rescanning everything in the past.
Yeah, that's the stateful streaming.
Yeah, stateful, and also like differential, the data flow, all those things.
That part is kind of clear because like almost all even like low-level systems, whenever they face continuous events of similar nature, like they can just prepare for it once and then repeat the action. So most of the similar projects that would be implemented in lower level languages would JIT compile the statement and then would just simply map the contents into like this executable area, would run on top of it and would give you the result. This kind of originates from a point that in the last few years, we've seen the decoupling of storage and compute. And this means that like the kinds of abstractions that we use may have to change parallel to this. So if we decouple one from another, the storage part of the server, now decoupled from compute, will be replying to a much more diverse set of queries than ever before, because now it has many potential clients, every one of which receives a very weird queries that are always different from subsequent users. And it will generate a lot of like those unusual events on the server side. So I was curious like how much we can actually port into some binary standard, maybe not the full SQL, but the fine-grained, very small operations. Actually, like myself and my company, we've worked a little bit on that side to the extent that we need, not to the extent to which others may benefit from it potentially. And I've seen that actually like within Minify, so like the C++ implementation, there is a project that a lot of companies use RocksDB as a key value store. So let's say if you're using something like key value store abstraction, I think it's kind of super common across the world. And I was a bit surprised that we haven't standardized that part earlier, because like you do operation like set and get, and sometimes you do a range scan. The keys and the values are almost uniformly binary strings. So some time ago, we implemented the C99 standard, and on top of or around it, a bunch of other high-level wrappers for any key value store abstraction, because we saw that kind of everyone needs something like this. Would you see this as like one of the potential steps in which we can go? And I guess you may remember projects within like Apache Foundation that are somewhat related. I think there's Voltron data that works on Apache Arrow, and then there is also Substrate. And I'm not sure if Substrate is part of Apache or not, but it's essentially also an attempt to kind of design a binary standard for all kinds of execution tasks that people would want to run on top of the storage.
Quick comment that is, maybe Tim can add more. That is, again, RocksDB is great. I mean, Flink using it, we're using it by ourselves too. And this is great kind of binary to do the key value store, as you mentioned. Even I think, I'm not sure why you know the company called Rockset.
Yeah, of course.
It's a SAS-based database, and they actually the core engine team about. I mean, they can turn this key value store as a real kind of OLAP system. They're certainly doable, and yeah, also I'm very kind of positive to this arrow thing. Even there's besides the GDBC, they are talking about ADBC or arrow-based.
Arrow is kind of interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and because we are all talking about those big data, the column storage, then why we still leveraging this very old school role-based JDBC protocol like forever? It's time to change.
Yeah, I think it's getting close. I think we'll probably see a new project that uses some of these new advancements, and we'll see what language it's in. I think I'm curious where WASM sits in too. It's another new kind of weird. I don't know where they're going with it, but it could be good. It could just be another.
Can be a new Docker.
Yeah, and Docker is kind of. It kind of was a good idea and kind of has some problems.
Gary was saying, seems like
Yeah.
RocksDB is kind of placing.
I don't know about hot. Well, I mean, most people are using it embedded. I mean, I don't know. It's I don't know. Hive's kind of like I don't know.
Yeah, and for example, you can have a single node using RocksDB, right? But there's not many point you using single node of etcd. What's the point, right? So it's very good to the clustering coordination using etcd. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot's going on with Iceberg as well. Yeah, the Hive part is the metadata part. And I mean, Cloudera is doing some things with some different engines coming in and out. And then again, moving a lot of this to Iceberg because of things like time travel, which is kind of cool. But I mean, there's so much new stuff coming out. Wait, if we did this talk tomorrow, we could add 3 more projects. I mean, that's great. It's just, if you're trying to do something mature, it's very hard to know what to pick. And I mean, if you're still doing something in Java, the changes that just happening right now in Java are almost like it's a new language. So with the green threads, with the Grail VM stuff, everything post JDK 20 is, you know, the level of performance is now.
Yeah, by the way, if you don't know me, my name is Jove. The reason I choose Jove as my nickname, this is not name on my passport. 20 years ago is I tried to choose something like Java lover. So end up with
Nice.
But again, I mean, say I'm working on the database side, and there's a lot of talk, no matter from like partner, VC, or customer that is, hey, what's the language? And there's a lot of Java-based system. It's very, very mature, and also Rust and the C++. They are, or even Go, right? There's a lot of database written in Go.
Carbon. I mean, whatever language that you use, it seems to be able to develop good projects as long as you have people dedicated doing it, have a good enough project. Especially the later use. Oh, Derby. Yeah, I haven't seen Derby in a while. But there's so many. I miss, what was the one from Pivotal? They had Gemfire XD. That was kind of cool.
It's a memory cache, something like that.
It was part memory, but there was some SQL in it. And it was kind of funky. It's an open source project. I think it's Apache now. There's so much. Serverless SQL. Yeah, Drill was cool. Drill born Calcite, and Calcite's used in that little NiFi controller, which I wonder, there's actually talk for some parts where we could do RocksDB and part of those pieces in between there. And then maybe opening some of that to put WASM, drop those in. And then maybe the communication between nodes becomes arrow over. Yeah, Calcite does the SQL parsing part that was the drill for drill. And then that went to Phoenix. It went to NiFi. There's like 9 projects using it, and it's written by one guy. Really smart guy.
Stu, yeah.
Okay. There's like 2 people helping him, but I mean, it's that one guy. Which is kind of scary if you look at like some of these projects, there's 1 to 3 major people. Is there a real, the Silly DB is pretty good.
Yeah, they do a lot of hardening on the
implementation is pretty fast. I mean, what's real time? Which real time? Oh, this real time. This one you could still do in HBase, but this one, maybe Scilla again, C++, but now with the speeding up of networks, RAM, everything else, I mean, some people just push it all into a very fast RAM and then just do it there. I mean, we saw that Alibaba's doing some of that. Again, if you've got the money, the engineers, you push everything into.
Yeah, and for example, we talked to some fintech customers, and if they looking for like 10 millisecond or maybe 5 millisecond, we can still have talk. But if they want to lower, they don't talk to anyone. They build everything by themselves. Even have a hardware.
RAM, yeah, it's just special hardware. They got special RAM. I saw a cool library. It's a Chronicle from Java, and the amount of stuff they could do with like this local queue is ridiculous. But I'm like, well, how do you scale that or move that somewhere else? Well, it runs here. You just put it on a big machine or two machines next to each other, and then you put a cable that's this wide between them. Or they have like literally radar dishes pointing at each other 2 feet away. Oh yeah, SQLite, another one going away. But nothing goes away forever. There's going to be people using it every piece of this for decades, man. But I think, what time are we hitting? We got 20 minutes. I hate to leave. I know people are wrapping it up, and we might want to go downtown to the arcade.
Yeah,
there's an after party for the people from the real time.
I can do maybe very quick 2-minute demo for the.
Yeah, why not, man?
Just give you some other idea that how we can processing data in Kafka.
Dude, why not? While we're here, man, do it live.
Fox.
Can we give him share access? Or very cool.
So I'm
real time, man. Oh.
I'm sharing the screen.
Nice. Anyone could do anything. Don't tell people that until we close this down.
Okay, so I do this very quick. I mean, just give you the idea that say, in our case, we share the same passion of NiFi. Everything should be very easy to configure. So for example, we do have this UI for you to get data from like Confluent, Redpanda, Pulsar, all those stuff. For example, if you're choosing Redpanda, you just set those fields. So after that, you get a very nice data lineage, kind of like governance. You do get the idea about, hey, I configure Kafka source and send the data to my data stream. Then you can build some interesting dashboard, for example, like this. So I'm building. So part of Timeplus, we try to make this easier for you to see the insight from your real-time data, right? So this data is coming from GitHub. It's real data. And this dashboard showing you that is, hey, this data keep coming, and this is the current hot topic, and this is the event, and this is the stuff. So, and if you run a query, so if you click any part of the panel, you see the query behind. And as I mentioned, this query is streaming query. It keeps running all the time. You don't have to rerun it. Push the new result to you. And similarly, we can have some stuff such as alerts. You can run a query, and for example, I have a demo somewhere to load the latest tweet. And if there are certain keyword in the tweet, it can send me a Slack. So you can do certain stuff like
you're gonna have to move that to Mastodon or Blue Sky pretty soon.
Yeah, of course, real-time customer support or like real-time marketing. Yeah, so as I mentioned, everything is very easy to use. So for example, I run a simple query. I get the rough idea about the result. This is in this mode, it's a running mode, and you get the distribution for each columns. And you can also do stuff like count star. As I mentioned, that is, we don't have to rescan everything. Say the first event is like 102, and next one we get this delta and add it to it. And by doing so, you can build some dashboard very easily. For example, I want to create a chart, and you can add it to the dashboard, right? So this is just a very simple demo to show you that is, if you have data in Kafka, in Kinesis, in REST API, there's a new solution for you to make sense of data without learning a lot of new SDK API or set up your own cluster. You can just using SQL, the language is familiar, and build a very nice dashboard and alerts. You might send this back to Kafka or send back to, say, Snowflake, if you want to prefer using your traditional BI, but for the data,
or Iceberg.
Yeah, of course. And the transformation part or the aggregation part actually can be powered by the new version of SQL. Yeah. Thank you for the watching.
Awesome. And he did that live. He did it live. Brave man. Oh, more
Harry's your
questions.
new best friend or something.
We gotta have a question get pushed to Kafka, and then I'll push him to Timeplus and to Flink, and we'll answer them with a prompt GBT thing we write in NiFi. That's the next meetup topic. Is there another?
Yeah, Harry asked, do any of these support pipeline or transform versioning either directly into Git or through export import?
NiFi saves all of its flows into GitHub or your own local Git. We also have our own NiFi repository that's backed by a database. And then when changes happen, we can push them to GitHub. The same with that catalog we were showing. You storing your stuff in Git yet? I mean, I don't see why you couldn't.
Yeah. So everything, as I mentioned, that is that's on your first item of the. I guess it's on your first item of the either best practice or kind of something you have to follow. Yeah, I mean, everything should be version controlled. So for us, it's all about SQL, either create a CQ or like those auto CQ or create a materials view. So you can easily have some version and you can roll back to the previous version. You can leverage stuff like DBT to understand the relationship between them. Yep.
Any of these projects to deploy the same flow to different environments. When I was in the cloud, we just pick your environment. I could deploy to all of them or into a function-based thing, real easy. That's pretty straightforward. Most of us run these things on multiple clouds, not a problem. Thanks, Patrick. That's not really a question, but that's good. I think it's time to wrap it up.